Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Dallas, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Busy week, busy month, huh?
It's been a roller coaster for sure.
And so I know you had supported President Biden staying in the race. You were even out campaigning for him late last week. So tell me, what was your reaction when he released his note saying he was stepping aside?
I was heartbroken. I actually was out with the second gentleman. We were in Phoenix, Arizona, campaigning. We were opening yet another office in Arizona to make sure that we could secure the win. And the crowd was pumped up. I dealt with the things that most people had to say about the president, which is that he's old. I always took on kind of those negatives and turned them into positives and encouraged people to support the president because he had done such great work and he was ready to finish the job. And so when it happened on Sunday, which was just 2 days later, I was a bit crushed. And I was crushed for a couple of reasons. Number one, because I know this president, I know his heart, and I know his record. I also was crushed because of how it took place. It just felt as if there was this circular firing squad, and it was all coming from within our own party. It really made me question, like, who are we as Democrats, right? But at the same time, as soon as kind of we started to kind of, lick our wounds, here it was that he then went a step further and endorsed our vice president, which also in that interim, I had a bit of angst because there were those that behind closed doors said that they basically didn't want the entire ticket. They didn't want the president, they didn't want the vice president. And so I knew that the next fight was about to take place, which was to make sure that the vice president became the nominee. And right now, I can say confidently that she is the presumptive nominee. And I'm so happy. So when I say roller coaster, I mean it. I've got the highs and I've had the lows, but I am ready to go.
And so let me ask you, why do you think President Biden stepped aside then? I mean, because you said you weren't happy with the circular firing squad. So what do you think was the real reason he dropped out?
I think it was the circular firing squad. I think it was this idea that our party was divided. And President Biden is a good man. If it was Trump, this never would have happened, just FYI. I mean, they tried to get him to step aside when his tape came out, that Hollywood Access tape. But this is somebody that will always put country first. And so it was the division. And I think that he potentially would have arrived at the same decision if people had gone to him privately and been respectful and talked about their fears, talked about their concerns, talked about why they felt like he should step aside, because ultimately he would want our party to be unified. I didn't think that it made sense that they were out front. They were saying things that were very discouraging about the president. And now it was only playing into the hands of the Republicans. And so I do think he still potentially would have came to the same conclusion. I just don't really like the tactics that were used.
Any people in particular who were on who were firing the shots, so to speak?
I won't use any names, but if y'all do a little Google researching, there's definitely some folk who still have not said that they will support the vice president. But and some of them may be close to home. But I'm gonna just leave it at that. There's research that can be done. I want to move past all of the negativity that was injected, and I want to just focus on the positivity that is surrounding our new presumptive nominee, and that's the vice president.
Was there any indication 2 days ago from the second gentleman that this was actually going to happen?
Absolutely not. There wasn't. In fact, the flight schedule was a little crazy. And so I was trying to figure out what flight the second gentleman was going to be on to get back to DC. And he wasn't even going back to DC. He was going to LA. So there was nothing in my mind that made it seem like there was something like this that was going to happen. And we both were out there. We were stumping very hard for the president as well as the vice president, obviously. But no, there was no doubt whatsoever.
Why do you think Vice President Harris is the best person for being the presidential nominee for Democrats right now?
Yeah, so there's a strategic component of it, and then there's just a straight up qualification component of it. Strategically, there was only one person that could inherit all the money that was already sitting there that had been raised. There's only one person that could inherit the infrastructure, all of the offices that have been opened. I want to say, I don't know. I've been in so many states that I can't remember who has what. I think Pennsylvania, the last time I was there, has 18 offices. I think Arizona has maybe 13 offices or something like that. We've got a ton of offices down in Georgia. So there's only one person that could inherit all of this. So from a strategic standpoint, strategically, it made absolute sense. Also, when you look at the excitement that she has garnered, the word of the week has been hopeful. That is the word that I've heard used more than any other word. And so we're talking about an energy that we've not seen. There's only one person who has the name ID, that could even be in this race. I know there's a lot of people that were trying to play fantasy presidential ticket. And so there's a lot of people that really are not very well known in this country, but she walked in and she already had that. That's that part from a strategy standpoint. But literally, purely from a competent standpoint and from looking at her resume, she's got it all. We're talking about someone who has served in the Senate as a senator, but also served as the vice president. And so she presided over the Senate. This is someone who has had an opportunity to build these relationships that will be invaluable going forward in her administration as she's trying to push forward with legislation. This is also someone who served as an attorney general. So she understands criminal justice and where the injustice seeps in. And as I've traveled the country and I've talked about the election, and we've tried to figure out kind of where Black men stood and what was going on specifically with Black men. Number one, they wanted an agenda that included something on criminal justice reform. And they also wanted economic opportunities. They wanted to be able to know that they could go out and get the investments that they need when it comes to the businesses that they are trying to build. And so the attorney general piece, along with her having been a prosecutor piece, and she was a progressive prosecutor. This is someone who back before body cams were kind of almost a norm, they're still not the norm, was pushing and was the first prosecutor and said, listen, we've got to have body cams on law enforcement. This is someone who believed in diversion programs because she understood what it was to be smart on crime. And so this is someone who I think can lead in a way that we need her to lead, to make sure that we are not overly incarcerating people, to pick up the baton from where the president was, because the president consistently has done things that have been progressive. He has made sure that those low-level marijuana convictions on the federal level, that he was getting rid of those. And so she also is obviously probably one of the best and only people that we can imagine to talk about reproductive access and what that looks like. She is a woman, right? Who else can be a better messenger on things such as IVF, things such as making sure that women have access to birth control, which is something that Project 2025 wants to make sure that it takes away, as well as she oversees our gun prevention program in the White House, the very first one, I forget the official name of it, but we know that when it comes to young people, they are very passionate about gun violence overall. So, she's been doing the work. She's got the experience. She has more foreign policy experience than anyone else that has ever entered office except for Joe Biden himself. And these are things that are going to inure to our benefit, especially as we see the hostilities that are going on around the country, or around the world, sorry.
And who do you like for her vice president and why?
So for me, I trust her. I've had more than one opportunity to sit down and have very frank conversations with the vice president over dinner, and I trust her. I think that the very first decision that a presidential nominee has to make that gives us an idea of kind of the level of thought that someone will put into the decisions that they make is picking their vice president. And we see that Trump picked J.D. Vance, and well, we see how that's working out for him. So, this is just a glimpse into their decision making. I think overall, though, what she will look for is she will look for someone that she considers to be a partner, because as she is governed with President Biden, it's been a partnership, which when he was vice president and it was President Barack Obama, it was a partnership. So I think that she will want to keep that up. I think that, Senator Kelly probably has a bit of a leg up because he currently serves in the Senate. That means that he already has relationships with those senators as he looks to potentially become the person that presides over the Senate. So I think that probably will give him a little bit of a head start. And obviously, because he currently serves in the Senate, this is somebody that she currently works with. But I don't know anything about the relationship that she has with some of these governors, and whether or not, they will make better sense. And then I'm sure that they will look at the electoral map and try to figure out, if this is a state that can be brought along that will be beneficial to make sure that we can seal the deal.
Do you think that the electoral college map is going to change for her? Because before the change in the top of the ticket, everybody was focused on the blue wall, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Do you see that changing at all?
I don't see it changing. Again, when we talk about the infrastructure of the Biden-Harris campaign, the infrastructure is already there. So the idea of kind of like pulling out some of that infrastructure in certain states and maybe moving it to different states, it just wouldn't be a very smart strategic move, because they have already made the investments. They have already started doing the hard work. And again, she owns those accomplishments right alongside the president of the United States. And we just saw that the vice president was just down in Houston, Texas, accepting her endorsement from AFT. And so I do believe that unions will stand solidly behind her, and support her. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at, those auto workers in Michigan, and we're looking at the partnership that they were able to have with this administration in supporting unions overall. And so this has been, as it's been reported over and over, President Biden has been the most pro-union president that we've ever had. And I believe that those relationships will continue to exist. And those relationships are really important when you start talking about the blue wall. So I don't see the way that they're attacking the map to change. I think that they will continue to attack the map the exact same way.
And I have to ask you, I'm sure you've seen what Republicans said. They've called the fact that President Biden stepped aside and now everyone is backing the vice president. They're calling this a coup, and they question the Democrats' commitment to democracy, saying no one voted for, no Democrats, really voted for Kamala Harris. So what do you say to that?
Yeah, I would say, number one, if there's anybody that knows anything about coups, the Republicans are definitely the experts on that. I will never take that away from them, especially when we saw what happened on January 6th, which was nothing more than them trying to perpetrate a coup. As it relates to the votes, this was yet another thing that I was very concerned about, as someone who really probably only ended up sitting, or one of the many reasons I sit before you as the Congresswoman is because a lot of people learned my name when we got into the fight over voting rights. It is something that I stand strongly by. And so I was very concerned about those 14 million votes that were cast, especially when I had colleagues that wanted to get rid of the entire ticket. But arguably, if you were voting for Joe Biden, it was not just Joe Biden. His running mate has been Kamala Harris. And so it is not a complete disenfranchisement, because those people were absolutely voting for the ticket. That's number one. Number two, candidates always have the ability to withdraw from an election and or just not be able to proceed. Unfortunately, we just saw the untimely passing of our beloved Congresswoman, Sheila Jackson Lee, down in Houston. She passed after people cast their votes for her. She is unable to obviously carry on. And so ultimately, this will come down to a logistical situation where our rules say that the precinct chairs that comprise the 18th congressional district are going to be the ones that are going to decide who will carry on and be the Democratic nominee going into November. It's much the same. If for some reason we had gotten to convention and delegates, Biden delegates, then started to turn against the president, and not do what the elected folk, or I'm sorry, what the voters had asked of them, that would be a different situation. But the president decided that he was going to step down. And so therefore, he's allowed to withdraw, and we welcome Trump to withdraw if he sees fit as well. But it is not a coup.
And you mentioned Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee and her passing, and I'm wondering, what do you think her legacy will be? And did she give you advice that sticks with you today?
Yeah, so she will definitely be known as a fighter. That's the first word that everyone usually uses when they talk about Sheila Jackson Lee. And then they start to go on about how she was a tireless worker. We've cracked a few jokes here this week. Just even when we were in our leadership meeting, our steering and policy meeting, where she served on steering and policy, and we used to talk about the fact that, like, Sheila Jackson Lee always created at least two of her at all times, right? So she'd be on her phone and potentially in another meeting while physically sitting in another meeting. She was always working. And so, it's going to be hard to fill those shoes as someone who was just constantly fighting the good fight, who pushed and pushed and pushed to make sure that another Texan's dream of seeing Juneteenth, Miss Opal Lee, was carried out, and making sure that we had that as a national holiday. You're talking about two fighters that were relentless in their fights. As it relates to advice, one of the things that Sheila Jackson Lee always told me was to be myself. And as I have served in a little bit of a different way than I think most people are used to seeing members of Congress serve, I must say that it meant the world to me to have someone who basically said, stand in your power and stand in your confidence, because that is what your constituents voted for. And with that type of advice, I've never flinched.
All right, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett of Dallas, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Great to see you, Jack.